It will be helpful if we begin with the simple observation that we are gathered together here, and then consider what this means. Let us ignore external interpretations which give us answers connected with fideism and tradition, and instead follow that interior voice which springs from our consciences and convictions. What then is the meaning of our presence here? It stems from the fact that we have within us a specific interior need which has brought us here. We cannot explain what this need is if we do not accept that each one of us has an interior life or inner person. We do not consist only of an exterior or outer person, but also of an interior person. So the need which has brought us here comes from within, from the interior person, and belongs to our soul. The inner person is seeking, and if it is to be successful in its search and find what it seeks, it must engage in interior recollection, in which it operates according to different rhythms and methods from those of the outer person. A retreat is principally a matter of recollection, not quantitative recollection, but first and foremost interior recollection. Our presence here is therefore not only a result of tradition, a certain impulse or some atavistic instinct. Of course, a large part is played by tradition as made up of facts which we inherit from experience as a whole. Here are many, many different lived experiences of Christianity, Catholicism, and the Church. We feel our link with them, and that is why we are here. The experience which brings us here is also very personal and consists in the need of the interior person. This is significant in an age where it would seem that the whole destiny of the person and of his existence must be guided and directed from outside with external means, that is, with the use of methods and means produced by people. This is happening in our particular age, when man's marvelous accomplishments are without parallel in the past, or at least so far as we know. However, even in this era, where people want to plan man's whole destiny and existence from outside with the help of technical means provided by so-called civilization, the person comes to realize that everything he produces and creates outside himself cannot be compared with himself, and that he cannot stand outside himself. Inside, we are ourselves, and this basic and constant awareness of the existence of the interior self or soul gives rise within us to the need for fulfillment, which is why we have come on this retreat. The reason we have come is to observe our own self with care and attention. Let us carefully observe ourselves in different situations and activities. Let us constantly examine and observe ourselves, I should say, in view of its vital and absolute importance. We come here to examine ourselves, and not only for the importance it has, for example, in relation to the proper development or running of a certain laboratory or office or occupation, including cooking and housework. In these cases, the self has only a relative or functional importance. However, the self also has its own absolute importance. If we come on retreat, the aim is to examine ourselves under the aspect of absolute importance. I should like to explain the difference between relative and absolute importance with the help of a very ordinary example. For you, it will already be a part of the past, since it refers to high school days. Sometimes a student will solve some very difficult problem in class, and this is an important moment for him. Then, at the end of class, the students start playing ball, and the one who solved the problem so brilliantly now shows no aptitude at all for the game. while another manages to shine and show his importance. These are two examples of relative importance. The different moments of relative importance in my past constantly shift. In the example, we saw that while one person is important in one field, another is important in a different one. We receive continuous information on such aspects of relative importance. We are constantly informed of outstanding human achievements in the field of sport, and maybe somewhat less so in the field of science. To avoid any misunderstanding, I would hasten to add that I am very interested in sport, and indeed that I am just as interested in sport as I am in science. We are constantly kept up to date as regards sport, science, and technology, and we share in these moments of relative importance for mankind, a gold or silver medal, a cosmonaut, and so on. All these things refer to the aspect of relative importance. However, we have come here with another attitude and a different aim, that of seeking what is important in an absolute sense. This is of real interest. We are here as a group, but we are not an undifferentiated mass. There is no gathering in which each one of us is more wholly himself and has a fuller sense of his own selfhood and his own absolute importance than he has here. So what we want to do is to examine ourselves with care and attention under the aspect of its absolute importance. In human beings, this awareness is linked to their relationship with God. You may be surprised at this, but I would ask you to look at yourselves carefully, especially in moments of personal prayer. Every time we enter into contact with God, we rediscover ourselves in its absolute importance. This rediscovery is, of course, not always simple or easy or, let us say, clear. Our prayer is sometimes mechanical and superficial, and with our experience and knowledge, we do not even manage to glimpse the essence of our search for our personal self, or discover it in its absolute importance through our relationship with God. And this is why we are here on retreat. If we try to deny a person's relationship with God, which is very deep and secret, but still very real, then human life splinters into the myriad problems of relative importance. This is the way the interior life of the individual disintegrates, but the collective life of mankind and humanity is destroyed in the same way. Outside the relationship with God, the life of the individual and of mankind does not reach the unity and wholeness which only this relationship can bring. All this may seem rather strange and complicated to you. However, I would beg you to reflect on it. Sometimes we express this idea by saying that our life loses its meaning when it is separated from the relationship with God. We shall talk about this tomorrow. Humanity has a tendency to ignore the reality of this situation and attribute a meaning to its own life outside the relationship with God. These two tendencies struggle for the supremacy in human life, both in that of the individual and in that of mankind as a whole. Youth is symptomatic that when the person sets God aside and tries to base his own life and that of others on something outside the relationship with God, he also tries to attribute absolute importance to various objects which in fact have only relative value and importance. We can say that he absolutizes them and raises them to the absolute level. We all know the 10 commandments. The first has always been, "You shall have no other gods besides me." We often repeat this commandment when praying or carrying out an examination of conscience. and on other occasions, and we wonder about its historical or prehistorical basis. It had contemporary relevance at the time when the Israelites found themselves in the midst of pagans who worshipped a number of divinities, and when they themselves made the golden calf and worshipped it. And it is just as relevant today. It is simply that the idols have changed. It is significant that those same atheists who struggle to free human life from the relationship with God also, albeit unconsciously, introduce a wide variety of contemporary idols into human life and consciousness. They are not golden idols called Baal or Astarte, like those we read about in the Old Testament. They are more abstract idols. They have only relative value and importance, but are given absolute importance as if they were God. The history of culture and thought has known many of these divinities. Progress. This is the connecting thread. It is a very positive and valid thing. But when it is raised to the level of divinity and given absolute rather than relative significance, then it is no longer in its correct place. Physical objects can also become idols, and it would seem that this is the case with the atom today. Sometimes a similar absolute importance is given to a people or race. It would seem that there is a sort of built-in nemesis, or in fact something deeper than that, in this tendency. When man gives absolute importance to something which has only relative importance, after a certain amount of time he starts, so to speak, to avenge himself or exact retribution from himself, and immediately overthrows whatever he had previously raised up to the dignity of God. My dear children, reflect well on the first divine commandment. You shall have no other gods besides me. From the perspective of this commandment, carefully consider the facts and examine your own self and your soul. We come on retreat in order to discover and analyze our own self and examine it from the perspective of its absolute importance, that is, in its relationship with God. A retreat is an interior and religious matter. There is a current of thought which reasons as follows. Religion is a human product, inasmuch as humanity has created a God for itself. And why has it created him? In order to submit to him. In other words, to submit to its own product. This is known as alienation. Humanity undoubtedly does create the concept of God. Like other concepts, we have created this one on the basis of personal analysis of the facts, and such analysis has often wrongly understood and undervalued the facts themselves. Man created a concept of God for himself because he did not understand the forces of nature and put God in their place. It is clear that two orders are being confused here. The first, or primary causal order, is being confused with what we call that of second or secondary causes. For a long time, we did not recognize all the multitude of secondary causes, and we undoubtedly still do not do so, although we are constantly investigating them in ever greater depth. In any case, knowledge of the closer and more immediate secondary causes certainly does not eliminate the problem of the first cause. It is said that knowledge of God is not scientific, and we often act on this assumption. You must forgive me for dwelling on this matter, but I know that your minds are constantly exercised by it. I want to move on as soon as possible from this subject to the question of life and the response to life. However, a certain amount of prior clarification and reflection is necessary. When one examines some subject scientifically, This is taken as referring to one specific way of thinking. This is the method normally used by the natural sciences. Even so, there are other ways of thinking. However, this is a vast question, and we cannot study it in detail here. In this connection, it would be helpful to read something of Gilson's brief work, God and Philosophy. This is not an easy text to grasp, but it does have the advantage of brevity. We often try to read such books only to exclaim almost at once, "I can't understand it." And the reason we do not understand is that we are accustomed to thinking in a certain way. We do understand for a moment, but then we lose our train of thought. However, I want to say at once that our scientific and intellectual approach to God takes place in very simple stages. All human thought in every branch of science moves through these stages. We start by experiencing something and then set out to seek the causes. This happens spontaneously, even in the mind of a child, who experiences something and asks, why? Thus, our scientific and methodological search for God as first cause follows the same path. We do not create the idea or concept of God from nothing. We create it, and rightly so, on the basis of external facts and the reality of the visible world, but also on the basis of interior reality. A combination of the two undoubtedly provides the starting point for our movement toward God. When I think of God, I am turning to Him because I see the world with my own eyes. This is the simplest and most elementary experience. However, when I think of God, this is also because I have an interior self, only that I think's God, only that I can think of God. God exists. Although it may sometimes be rather vague, we do, despite everything, have the concept and conviction of God's existence. We may not have examined this line of reasoning in its full depth, and some people may also object that it is not scientific. By in its full depth, I mean to the level of our common intelligence. In other words, that of myself as physicist, historian, and theologian. So, when I think of God, I am usually thinking of the Creator. However, first cause and Creator are not the same thing. When I think of the first cause, I am thinking in abstract terms, but when I think of the Creator, I am thinking in much more concrete or specific terms. Let us examine the concept of Creator for a moment. We can go back to our catechism, which says, to create means to make something out of nothing. However, this is not the best definition. When we say to make, we think of a person making something, but the concept of the Creator, who is in his essence the first cause, is something different. Creator, God, He who is. See if you can find a copy of He Who Is by the English author Eric Maskell. God said to Moses, I am who I am, He whose essence is who is. Do any of us creatures have isness or existence as our essence? Creating undoubtedly does mean making something out of nothing, but in the more specific sense of giving existence, not constructing objects or beings, but transmitting existence, causing a being to begin existing outside myself. This is what the Creator does. God is Creator. My dear children, we make a retreat in order to examine our own self, specifically in the perspective of its absolute importance. I said that what is of absolute importance in me is linked with God. This is why I am now saying that God is the Creator, because we have this concept of God within ourselves. We come on retreat to examine ourselves, to examine with attention and care the image of God which is found within us. A retreat is a wonderful thing, and you must remain faithful in making it. Maybe the greatest obstacle for us in our relationship with God, who is Creator, is the fact that He is invisible, and we wish He were the object of direct experience. However, it is easy to realize that if He were the object of direct experience and were visible, He would not be God. God cannot be visible. Matter is visible. The body is visible. And we know that it is not God. It is destroyed, dies, changes, dissolves. It is subject to time, whereas God is eternity. He is above time and knows no beginning and no end. God is outside the concepts of beginning and end. They do not refer to Him, but they are found in the world of created things. Beginning and end are found in me. He is invisible, and this is something very special. However, if I look within myself and reflect on myself for a moment, I can say that to a significant degree, I too am invisible. The visible aspect of myself, which can be perceived by the senses, is only a part of me. We might describe it as the outer person, whereas the inner person is invisible. So the inner person, who is invisible, cannot be in conflict with God, who is also invisible. I come into contact with God within my mind and soul. My mind is invisible. My dear children, the aim of a retreat is to examine the image of God which we have within us. And what image of God do I carry in my mind and in my soul? The word image has many meanings. So the aim of the retreat is to examine one's own self in the perspective of its absolute importance, and also to examine with care the image of God in one's own mind and soul. What is God's image in me like? I am put in mind of a scrap of conversation I heard between two children. One asked the other who she thought God was, and she replied that maybe He was strength or maybe light. Clearly, these were metaphors, but what is significant is that these two children wondered about this point and that they were seeking some answer. This is how our interior intellect studies and seeks the image of God within us. A retreat has the aim of finding this image in its fullness. We must reflect on the image of God as found in each one of us. Otherwise, this study of our own self would be meaningless and would degenerate into consideration of various things of only relative value, and then this would not be a retreat. So I urge you from now on to seek the image of God within yourselves. This image may be very poor or clouded, or it may be unclear and fragmentary because your search for God lacks constancy. There may be a certain superficiality and a lack of depth and interior life and union in your knowledge of God. Thus, a retreat should heighten our interiority. However, my dear children, this also involves a search for one's own self and for the basis of its most essential value, that is, for what is of absolute importance in it. I realize that in today's reflection I have not answered the main question. Indeed, although you may think I have done so, I have in fact not replied at all. However, I tell you that I have not answered the question of why I recognize myself in its absolute importance only in the encounter with God. I want to answer this question tomorrow. For today, let us say that this happens in as much as God is not solely strength or light. God is person. Only the encounter with that person who is God provides us or ourselves with the sense of the absolute importance of life.